Mark Pagán. I'm here to moderate this panel. I'm a filmmaker, journalist, and writer. I'm with some great people. We're going to dive into it quickly after I introduce them. All the way to my left, I have Mino Lora. Mino is from the People's Theater. She's the executive artistic director. We have in the middle here, Colm. Got it. Okay. Colm Summers, a working theater artistic director. And to my immediate left here, we have José Serrano-McClain, community economic development specialist. And I'm going to start with you, Mino. While I ask these questions, anybody can jump in, since a lot of this is going to be overlapping. We are going to be talking a lot about persistence, access, and policy today, and how to build artistic communities in the city. And I want to jump uptown to start with you, Mino.
Yes, please.
You've worked to build theater in Washington Heights. As many of us know, it's a place of deep cultural history. But as we can imagine, real issues with challenges around space and access. And when you think about starting, or when you thought about starting and sustaining a working class rooted arts organization here in New York City, specifically in Washington Heights, what have been the biggest highs? What have been the biggest barriers? And what needs to change structurally to make it easier for others? Easy answer.
Yeah, great. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. So I think the first thing is I didn't think of kind of the troubles. We started in 2008. That was some who may be around. That was not a time to start a company or anything, really. So there was nothing to lose. And for us, I think the high was just like gathering a group of individuals in Washington Heights, knowing with the premise as the founder, and it came from my thesis project in peace studies and conflict transformation. And it was, how does our immigrant uptown community also deserve the arts? We're in New York City, but a lot of the people uptown, we weren't going to Midtown and we didn't feel welcome and we weren't coming to Broadway. So the idea of starting something right there, space was absolutely non-existent, and still is, but in process. But that didn't stop us because theater happens everywhere and happens in community. So I think one of the key things for us was engaging from the very start with the $300 I had saved from waiting tables, that first production and drama bookshop, and then uptown at Rio Gallery with Broadway housing. But engaging with partners was so key for those first, kind of 4 or 5 years of the company. And then partnering, we work with immigrant communities, and that is multi-generational. So we really partner with the Department of Education, working with young people and doing work with multilingual learners. And that's how we kind of, so suddenly schools were giving us space, and community centers, and the local Y of Washington Heights and Inn was like, we're doing a program for seniors and elders. I want to do theater. And, doors were open, like asking and starting. And then what happened from there, which is just key to our values and the way that theater is created and work is created in community, is partnerships were built. And through those partnerships with elected officials, partnership with schools, with leaders, with settlement houses. And when we were doing pieces, Theater of the Oppressed was a big part of how we started doing work around housing and immigration and police brutality. Like, we were telling these stories. And there, someone wrote, back in 2015, that there's an uptown cultural renaissance. And I'm very grateful and proud that we were part of that. There were definitely visual artists. There was a lot of things happening. And we are right now, speaking of space, I think a lot of those relationships helped to build who we are today, 16 years in, and in the midst of this capital project. We are next year inaugurating, and it's great to see Randy Berry in the house from Indie Space, a theater. We are constructing and building a theater in Washington Heights. It'll be the first theater of Washington Heights and Inwood, an immigrant cultural center dedicated to working class and immigrant communities, and creating a space that tells our stories, not because theater cannot happen in other spaces, but because we deserve cultural homes in every neighborhood. And this is the first of hopefully many.
You were, let's give it up. It's literally you were backstage, you were saying the steel is coming in today or
literally,
something like that?
Steel, I'm getting texts. Steel has been delivered.
I want to follow up actually on something
Yeah.
else you mentioned backstage, and you talked a little bit when we were chatting backstage about a social impact study.
Yes.
That you all did. Can you tell us what the decision was with pursuing that and what you learned?
Well, I think, there's always, you hear, arts and culture builds economies, and that's a big part of like how we lobby to government and how we advocate for arts and culture. And yes, yes, yes. But I wanted to be more specific, and we spoke about that, right? It's not only about the tourism, but how does creating arts and culture, centering arts and culture and communities of color in neighborhoods of color, working class neighborhood, also support economy. So we did a study, and we worked with consultants on really looking what is the economic impact of that. And we know that just in the year of construction, so starting now, the whole core and shell is done, but the fit out, $43 million will be generated. And this is the Bodegas, this is a local hardware stores. And we worked very diligently with the Washington Heights Chamber of Commerce, with the Inwood Chamber of Commerce, with the Women's Chamber of Commerce, to make sure that we are also certifying local businesses, and so that it's also being built by. So that's also creating funding and opportunities. And as we know, Claro, in the first 3 years, we know $23 million will be generated. And then the social impact is right now only 6% of playwrights in the commercial space on Broadway are Latino. And one of those is Lin-Manuel, who we love. But we need more, right? We need more pipelines for more diverse voices, and Latino is one of them. But like, we have playwrights and actors and artists from Uganda, from Nigeria, from China, from Iran, and all of these voices, like nonprofit theater, off-Broadway spaces, this is where they're being cultivated. And we've seen that, right? National Black Theater, amazing organization, has then done these transfers. And we're not in the space of commercial theater. There's a space for all of us. But I think the investment in these also has an impact, right? Only 6% of theaters are BIPOC owned in New York City, a city that is majority, right? Majority, global majority. So I think it was great I knew it from our connections, from our reality, but it was good to put numbers to it and do a study of what it'll impact for Washington Heights, Inwood, and the Northwest Bronx.
Can I add something these economic impact studies, because I think it's so important that artists and arts organizers and cultural producers sort of get more fluency in understanding like why government makes a decision to fund, to make a public investment. These economic impact studies are the things that policymakers sometimes need to be able to say, well, okay, if it's gonna generate $43 million in these kind of additional businesses that are able to make money because there is more cultural life in that place, because the construction is going to involve, many more businesses. Government policymakers are looking at that and they're saying, okay, well, we make money too. We earn taxes on that additional money. So it's a sort of it's a justification for making a public investment.
Yes.
And so you really can't get public investment without saying, hey, here's how this is going to affect the city's finances, and here's how we draw that conclusion. And I say that because it's really important that we develop a fluency as cultural producers to understand that art generates wealth and that art generates fiscal sustainability for our public sector. And that if we can draw that line, we can be better at making those public investments flow.
Mm-hmm. Can I just add one thing to that, which is to say that I think, hi everyone. One thing that I think is important if we're talking about fluency is exactly, and it's inherent to the model that you're working in, Mino, is I think that in order to assuage the kind of soft power gentrification that's articulated by the influx of wealth driven by development, you have to put an artist in the driver's seat who's willing to work in a reciprocal way with their community. And I think that's what you're doing.
Jose, I want to jump into your economic development brain.
Yeah.
I also want to point out something you shared backstage, which is a great mantra. Artists and art leaders need to be part of community transformation. And I want to talk about how artists actually become part of a neighborhood's future and not just its branding. Are there models or policies that you could point to that have or should link artists more directly to housing, funding, local power?
Sure, I'd love to answer that. So first of all, hi everyone. I'm Jose. I'm also a CUNY alum. I went to Queens College for my MFA, and I worked very closely with Tom at the Queens Museum when he led that organization. I was the third community organizer at the Queens Museum, so have always been in this, in the kind of cultural space, but also connected to the work of policy and power. So your question about how artists are linking, look, there are a ton of ways in which community transformations happen. Communities don't just transform. The People's Theater, as for those that don't know the background, much of that is partly because Mino and other community organizers and cultural leaders in that community understood that there was a dynamic happening around the future of Inwood. And the city's Economic Development Corporation was looking to change city policies to allow for greater height in development, to be able to essentially a rezoning of a community. And when you rezone a community, you allow for more investment and for bigger buildings, and it also can lead to the transformation of a community that is undesirable for folks that have already been living in those communities, right? So, but the work and the understanding that community transformations are in many ways planned by policymakers, right? And in many ways planned by policymakers at the behest of developers that are like, yo, if you rezone, if you allow us to build in that neighborhood, we can all make more money. And the city's finances are going to improve for that. It brings all of the challenges of, and that, the Inwood rezoning, it was a very dramatic few years of planning for a community transformation. But those like Mino and others who understood that this would be an opportunity to make sure that there would be benefits for the community in that transformation, and that transformation could lead to the funding, public investment in this amazing project, public investment that would be transformational in the way in which community voices in Washington Heights and Inwood would be able to have a place in that future of that community. So one, I think it's important for artists to be artists and art leaders in every community in New York to be aware of what is the Economic Development Corporation planning? Where are rezonings happening? Right now, the city has just done a citywide sort of change of policy, which is called the City of Yes, which is allowing for more development in places where it was constrained. And now that whole question of where is development happening? Where are developers going to plan for these new mixed-use developments? And in what are the opportunities to say, well, that development may be more welcome if we know that the ground floor space is an opportunity for affordable spaces for cultural organizers and for artist studios. So it's really important to understand the language of community transformation, the opportunities to essentially be fluent in the way to participate in those transformations. There's also really important work happening in the South Bronx, which is there's a community land trust that has identified an underutilized public asset, a former hospital or health center, and now they're planning for a permanently affordable community-directed space that is going to be a center for health, education, and arts. It's called the Heart Center, and it's going to be managed by the Port Morris Mott Haven Community Land Stewards. And again, those are working class folks that are, and many cultural leaders in that community that see an opportunity to identify publicly owned buildings. And that's an opportunity that exists in many of our communities. So finding those underutilized publicly owned assets is another really important way in which, and again, finding ways in which those community-owned assets remain community-owned assets with permanent affordability kind of baked in through these ideas around holding land in trust. Those are the kinds of things that I think we as cultural organizers need to be really engaged with.
Through this, getting ready for this, I had actually did not know about community land trust. I'm it seemed when we were backstage that all of you nodded, as in
Yeah.
you have some back. I'd love Jose and all of you to break this down a little bit, both in terms of what a community land trust can mean, as well as are there other similar policy initiatives that we should be aware of, or policy initiatives that maybe we are aware of but don't have as much traction.
Sure, I can kick us off. So, a community land trust is essentially it's a social infrastructure. It's an alliance of community leaders that say we will have a way to think about cooperative ownership of property, and specifically to say that we will hold these assets, lands or buildings, in a way that is that commits them to be permanently affordable, so to be managed in a sort of cooperative manner. And many of the kind of challenges of sustaining community land trust initiatives is that we do need to develop ways in which we are managing things cooperatively. So there is no sort of, it isn't like a privately owned thing where there's someone who is making decisions. There's usually a board, and they're used to, and it has to have a kind of community directed mission and community governance. And, but in that way, if you can achieve that level of cooperation among community leaders to hold some piece of some facility or some land in trust, you can commit it to be permanently affordable. And it's essentially a holding company, but it's a community-directed holding company for land or facilities.
And it's, I mean, the reason I know it is there was a big push in Washington Heights and Inwood even before the rezoning for, and groups like, Word Up Community Bookshop. I was one of the initial volunteers for that, an amazing, still volunteer-run organization of looking what are lands that are publicly owned lands that we can make community land trusts, CLTs. And what happened is like there's not too many uptown, and that was part of the issue. When it's privately owned, no private landlord wants to give it away. And so there, it doesn't always get to that. It's great to hear, and I know one of the cultural organizations part of that one in the South Bronx, Upbeat, who does amazing work. So if you're able to get there, it's a lot of, it is egalitarian and it is a lot of voices. So just even the work of community building, and I mean, it takes work, but it's such a beautiful and important concept that I hope can be more, can be successful and continue to grow.
I could not agree more. And I think, real estate is the invisible hand choking out the culture sector and the American theater in specific. I'm going to speak from where I am. I think any off-Broadway producer, and Mino knows this, will tell you that, your principal costs are your personnel and your rental, right?
Yep.
And we have like an urgent need to come together, capitalize and acquire property. Ownership is the future of sustainable audience development, access, and the future of the American theater.
I actually want to run off or jump off that a little bit in terms of capital and where you're finding it. Now, working theater.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Here.
Working theater
Yeah.
centers working class stories, but as we know, institutions don't always prioritize or center working class artists. That's a common theme for today as well as this talk. But what does it mean to make art without the elite support? How, like the big how, but as well, how can artists organize better as workers, not just as creatives, but as workers to build solidarity and audience connection?
There are so many parts of that question. Let's start with how we can be better cultural organizers and work in spaces creating solidarity. Working theater has been around it's our 40th season this year. Been trailblazing access initiatives within the American theater for 40 years. And I have to say, I get a little uncomfortable when I talk about access building. I think too often the idea of access is marshaled in the service of foundational support and not on-the-ground aid. And what do I mean by that? I have like a stupid phrase I use to remember what the tent poles are, and it's, I enjoy capitalist grief. And what I mean by that is infrastructure, I for infrastructure, E for economics, C for cultural sovereignty, and G for governance. And I think, for example, infrastructure, can everyone get to your fucking theater? Are you in a transit desert? Economics, we talked about this earlier. Not everyone has broadband or a cell phone. Can you pay in cash? It's all very well if you have a sliding scale, but can you pay in cash for the show you're going to? Can your grandmother pay in cash for it? Is it free? And is that worked into your budget? I think like your budget is your aesthetic, right?
Statement of values.
Statement of value, it is your statement of values. Cultural sovereignty, are you making work that is fetishistic and about a community, or is it for a community? If you're making work in Washington Heights, is it in Spanish?
Yes.
Because language justice needs to be happening in order for that work to really be accessible. And finally, governance. It's not enough to say we have commissioned 6 cultural organizers, we've commissioned 3 guys from IBEW, whatever. Invite them onto your board. Invite them onto your advisory boards. Let them lead your organization. I think that's sort of my soapbox about how to become more integrated.
Yes.
Using working theater as a case study, how have you all gained a foothold, or what ways are you looking to gain a better foothold in the communities you work in?
We try to listen. I'll take as an example. Last year, I had the idea to design a rapid response theater project to the needs of delivery cyclists working in the city. Those of us involved in community work and organizing work know their struggle, so I won't go into it in too much detail here. But we partnered with Workers' Justice Project at Working Theatre to develop the Los Deliveristas project directly with their kind of nascent union. And one of my favorite occurrences in my time at Working Theatre is that in staging the development of that work, La Dureza was the play by Ed Cardona Jr., a bilingual solo show about a day in the life of a delivery cyclist who gets jumped. We wound up not only developing the play, but also acquiring a donation to their organization through one of our donors. So there's a pipeline from our philanthropist portfolio to theirs. And I think that is the value of this work. That feels to me like worthy theatrical and cultural organizing crossover.
For all of you, we're mostly talking about, from Working Theatre, we're talking about building within the community, building these spaces, or looking for spaces. Now, I want to have us talk to the institutions themselves. So how can institutions improve conditions or improve access for working class artists, for communities, spaces?
One thing is trust. I think so often when you think of organizations that are community rooted or that are working class, I think there's more opportunity for institutions. And when I say institutions, it's both in the philanthropy sector, but as well as the larger, PWI, predominantly white institutions, kind of these staple institutions in New York City that we all know. There's a level of trust that is needed on both ends, right? Of saying, we give you space, we're giving you funding to do what you do, rather than come and fit into this little box of what immigrants do, right? We are many things, we are multitudes. And I think what is successful and what is needed and is happening, right? It is happening in both of these spaces, but can happen more. I think there are institutions and foundations that are doing that, that are seeing that. And that are trying, right? New York City Center started a partnership with People's Theater a few years ago with we have an Academy for Theater Leadership and Activism with young people and youth and immigrant youth. And we started as a community partner. And first it was like, let's just do field trips. And that's okay, right? That's how we can start. But then how do we continue to engage? What else is there? Now there's conversations, how can we come uptown and actually be available there in your community? And what does that look like? What do commissions look like? How do you trust us and our work that we know what we need? We know the stories we need to tell. And I think that is essential. Then the other part of it is like, we are opening this space that is going to be a home for immigrant artists and artists of color in New York City to create. And part of that level of accessibility, that's how we started, will continue and expand. So needing funders to say yes to a space subsidy grant. That's going to be essential so that working theater, so that so many groups who need homes, so many of these smaller companies that need a home can create, right? And I think that's another level of like, that's what we need. Trust us that we're right now building a $1 million pot for the first 3 years to be able to give free and low cost space, rehearsal space, performance space to artists in New York City who need it. And we have some funders who have already joined on, but we need more, whether it's individual, whether it's institutions, whether it's cultural organizations who want to be doing work, what is that recompense? So I think that is level of like, I know, even if you don't know us, trust that we know what we're doing, right? That we grew from 300 to 2 million, that we are hiring from within. Like half of our staff were former students, and this was the first internship. And so it's really about accountability. We have, we know the stories and the sounds and the rhythm. And I think there is a level of like, don't try to tell me what to do. Yeah.
I'll answer that question by saying that, so when I think of institutions, I think of first and foremost our public sector institutions and our policymakers, and then I have some thoughts about what the funder community can be more proactive with today. So obviously we all know and we've heard a lot about the affordability crisis. We are our creative workforce in New York City, in New York State, and this is across the country, is living in economic precarity. Our policy muscles in thinking about the arts and culture most typically live within is government making grants to institutions? Is government funding organizations? And there's a huge and important sort of question around the types of organizations that are getting public funding. But what we haven't developed as policymakers is a sensibility around understanding the plight of the creative worker and what would an all hands on deck approach look like to centering creative workers or the creative workforce in strengthening a city's or any region's cultural ecosystem. And when you bring it, when you then put the worker at the center of defining the problem of the precarity of the cultural sector, then you begin to realize that your policy tools can go beyond what the cultural funding agency can do to support and fund organizations. One, it could be funding more artists directly. And we've seen ways in which cultural funding agencies are flexing their muscles during the pandemic. We saw a program that the city launched, which is, it can be expanded, it can be revived to fund artists directly. Two, city government and state government can get really better at centering or at defining the question of just the lack of benefits and other protections that creative workers, because we work in industries that are not 9-to-5 employment, right? There are so many cultural workers in New York from a survey that was conducted by CRNY, Creatives Rebuild New York, an organization that I had the privilege of working with. We know that about 20% of artists have no insurance at all, and about another 60% are on Medicaid, and that's really, and there's a benefits cliff. If you make a little bit more than about $40,000, then you're all of a sudden, you do not have, now you can't benefit from Medicaid. So there is a benefits question, and we think that the idea of how institutions like the Department of Education here in New York City, which benefits from the work of teaching artists across this city, and is not contributing into the security of those workers, we think that the city can do better to establish a portable benefits regime so that city creative workers that are teaching artists are better able to pay for quality health insurance. And so there are things like that that we need to be thinking about that are centering the worker and not just sort of our organizations, okay, which is a really important question as well.
And like when you fund some of these organizations, like we're a theater organization, but like we have a caseworker on staff, right? We connect our families, talking about like how we, Jose, you were saying how we in the pandemic, like we hand delivered cash to our families, right? We went grocery shopping for those who couldn't, and we connect our students, our 150 students and the families who need it, to food. To pantries, to housing and justice, to lawyers. So that's why that network is built, because they trust us, right? We are their entry point, right? But from here, a lot of things can happen. So that's where like this funding can then actually give full-time work with benefits, with all the things from these organizations.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I would just add that I think access initiatives have to be more than concrete for the ramp. They have to be more than $15 on a sliding scale. And it is not good enough for a major institution with an enormous operating budget to welcome community partnerships and then not pay them. What does that say about your organization if you are working into the millions of dollars in overall operating and you will not pay your community partnerships, and at the same time you'll turn around and say, our mission is to support bold new voices? Come on.
Yes, yeah.
I'll say one more thing. So moving from sort of public sector institutions to foundations and cultural funders, cultural funders have an opportunity to get smarter about understanding the landscape of organizations that are fighting for the rights of artists and engaging in policy work that supports the cultural ecosystem. Funders need to get smarter about the politics and power and policy, and the fact that there are many organizations across the city and across the state that are doing really good work in moving the needle on policy issues that support artists. But the foundation community, it just needs to get smart about understanding who's doing this work and how they can be supported. And in many ways, how to create funding mechanisms that allow those organizations to work together more collaboratively, to sort of build coalitions. And I think we need to get better about also making sure that artists have access to the coalitions that are fighting for their rights and for policies that improve their lives.
That's great. As we all know, we're sitting in a major institution, a CUNY alumni, and this institution, like a lot of CUNY schools, MFA, there are many, I'm sure there are MFA students here, and there's so much that can go into an MFA program, so much information that's shared. I want to give you all the opportunity. This is my last question, and especially for the sake of time, I want you to imagine that you've gotten on the 6 train with somebody in this audience. Yeah. They're getting off at the next stop. They're getting off at 59th Street. You have one stop to give them, like, this is what you need to know. So if you want to speak to an MFA student, if you want to speak to a policymaker, if you want to speak to an institution, I want to hear the one thing, not an elevator pitch, but the one thing you would say in between those stations.
I can start. So in just looking at that, I think we artists don't live in silos. And I think what I would say is that idea of how we belong in all of these different spaces, and actually we must embed ourselves into government, into city government, into advocacy work, into education work. Like, art exists everywhere, and don't look at it through the lens. And it'd be great if MFA programs also teach you that, right? I had to learn on the go. I know what slab depressions are. I know about things that I never thought I would know, doing real estate, doing advocacy, doing lobbying, like all of these things. And I think it would be really important to know we belong in all of these spaces. We deserve to be all of the spaces. We elevate these spaces by being there. So learn about them and get in there.
Yes.
Yeah, I can speak to that, and I want to say that this is not a niche question; it's an existential question. The future of the American theater is the future of access creation. every theater in the country is watching audiences disappear. We all know the solutions to that problem, but none of us are interested in really doing the work because we're chasing the last 10 years of a subscriber class who are disappearing. That's it.
Wow. Yeah, I want to build on Mino's exhortation, which is Hunter, we're here, right? We the people. I think it would be incredible for Hunter to continue to build on these conversations that are happening here today. I do agree, Hunter and other CUNY schools, because they are chock full of working class artists, there needs to be more education about politics and power. I consider my palette these days, my creative palette, those very things: government budgets, government programs, government policies. And I think of myself as a creative in those spaces, and I think that MFA programs and other creative education programs have an opportunity to build more of that fluency among our young creatives, to be able to shape the transformation of policies and shape the transformation of their communities, because that, I think that to me feels like a holistic practice when you are involved in your community.
Perfect.
Yes.
Let's give a big round of applause to Mino, Colm, and Jose.